Are we on? It's still giving me the waiting light. Okay, we're on. Guys, it is Thursday, June 27th, 2024, and you're watching the MMA Eco Live podcast. So happy to have you with me today from beautiful Portland, Oregon. If you haven't met me, my name is Chris Presnell. I am the owner of MMA Ecosystem, where my sole job in this world is to report on Asian MMA. And today we're going to get into a lot of that. Going to touch even on UFC 303 this weekend, Zombie Fight Night. We got WLF, JCK, all going down throughout Asia this weekend. And so happy to have you. Later in the show, I'll answer your questions so you can drop those anytime you want. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, like all that stuff. Really appreciate it. All right. First of all, let's get to UFC 303. This is the annual July 4th International Fight Week pay-per-view. And I've long felt that it's never really been it's been a long time, I'll say, since it's been the strongest card of the year. Usually that falls to like New York, that falls to some event in other tentpole event in the spring or the fall. This year, obviously, UFC 300 is going to be the biggest card of the year. Although, let's see what the Sphere has to offer us. That looked really cool yesterday. If you didn't see on the UFC social media, the aerial shots of the Sphere lit up for UFC Riyadh season, UFC Noche. I'm not sure how that all strings together. Riyadh season, UFC Noche, I think is the official title. UFC 306, whatever. A Mexican themed event sponsored by Saudi Arabia, held in Las Vegas, US, most likely headlined by an American and a Georgian. So a truly international, somewhat confusing affair. All I really care about is that there are fights and that there are good fights. But we'll see. Hopefully it sounds like we may get some news on the fights for that this weekend, and we should be soon, because that's just about less than 3 months away. So we should be, I'm guessing the fight card's been already built out. We'll probably get a lot of those fights dropped all at once. Not to mention UFC 305. That's almost 2 months away, and we only have a few little fights for that. Haven't really got, we've got the main event, but there's a lot more yet to be announced. I'm guessing we'll get that in the next couple days as well. But that is the future. Let's talk about UFC 303. So honestly, on paper, I'll be honest, this card doesn't really do a whole lot for me. At least I'll say that only in terms of like divisional significance sort of way. A lot of the fights don't really hold a whole lot of weight respective to the division. You look at the main card, the main event, you've got a rematch, a fairly recent rematch where one guy knocked out the other. I think it's fairly likely it'll go the exact same way between Yuri and Alex Pereira. Co-main event, Brian Ortega and Diego Lopez should be an incredible fight. Yes, obviously I'm looking forward to that fight, but it's possible that that Brian Ortega goes up to 155 after this. So should he win that fight, he may leave the division. If Diego Lopez beats top 5 ranked Brian Ortega, then that could actually really shake up the featherweight division. So you do have that. You've also got Macy Chasson versus Mayra Bueno Silva. Not much to admire there in terms of like the potential that fight could bring, but it's at least I actually think that, yeah, this fight does belong on the pay-per-view main card, simply because we can't just put every single fight between ranked bantamweights bury them on the prelims and then complain that no one cares about the division. I think it is a way to, like, I don't know, just give a little bit of spotlight to this division. Also, one of them just fought for a title. Macy Chasson, I don't know, maybe has hit her ceiling. Either way, they've at least put the majority of the ranked fighters on the main card. but I don't know if the winner of this is really that going to be that close to a title shot. What with Juliana Pena probably getting the next title shot, and Kayla Harrison maybe getting the next one, or another number one contender fight. Maybe the winner of this fight will fight Kayla Harrison. I don't know. And then you've got Anthony Smith versus Roman Dolidze. Could be interesting, but not really interesting either way in terms of like division. It's a middleweight who's only fighting at light heavyweight because it's short notice. Kind of one of those like patched together fights. So, that's like the storyline, the intrigue level of this card. I would say it is relatively short on story. However, that's not to say that the card will not deliver on an entertainment perspective. I actually do think the card will deliver in terms of entertainment. Lots of finishes, I think, and a lot of fun fights through and through on the card. And so I'm not here to tell you don't watch UFC 303. I think it'll be well worth your time in terms of entertainment. And that's really why we watch MMA, right? Because of the entertainment. So, but kind of an odd pay-per-view. Granted, it was salvaged. It was supposed to be a top-heavy Conor McGregor event. And so when you lose that, it's kind of hard to like transition a top-heavy card into a more even through and through card. So, that's always the risk that you run with Conor McGregor pay-per-views. And then, of course, we had all the stuff with the co-main and all that constantly cycling. But what I really want to talk about is Ray Tsuruya. Ray is probably the best Japanese prospect right now, 22 years old, making his, UFC debut. I'm still confused about the particulars of Road to UFC fights that are on UFC cards, but I'm calling it a UFC debut. He's fighting an established UFC fighter and Carlos Hernandez at flyweight. I do think that Ray Tsuruya is going to take this fight. I think that ultimately exactly what he's already really good at, his pace, his frenetic grappling, even his wild striking is going to be too much for Carlos Hernandez. This is an interesting fight because Carlos Hernandez just fought Tetsuro Taira. So he's almost kind of getting as close as you can to a rematch with Taira in the sense of that he's fighting another really young, hot Japanese prospect who specializes in grappling. Definitely in the Carlos Hernandez fight, that fight was finished by TKO. Taira knocked him down on the feet, finished him with punches on the ground. So definitely both guys have the striking, but it is interesting. I wonder how much of like even fighting Tetsuro Taira is kind of going into Hernandez's mind of like, this is how I would have prepared different for this kind of fighter. Now, there are differences in Taira versus Tsuruya. I think Taira is a much bigger flyweight, at least on the optics side. I'm not really sure about the particulars, but it seems like he's a much bigger flyweight than Ray Tsuruya. Obviously, Taira has been in the UFC for a relatively long time compared to Tsuruya, who's making his UFC debut. So there are a lot of differences as well. But, for Hernandez, there is a little bit of matching of perspectives. A lot of people really high on his opponent from Japan, this young guy. So I think that is actually an interesting storyline for this fight. And Hernandez is overall a pretty good grappler, pretty good wrestler. The problem is that Tsuruya is that much better and he pushes a much harder pace, I think. So I think ultimately you're going to see a lot of the same things that you saw out of the Hernandez-Taira fight. Hernandez in the first round was dominated pretty thoroughly by Tetsuro Taira on the mat. He was mounted, no real close submission attempts, but some like hints at submission attempts down the pipeline from Taira. So I think that ultimately Ray Tsuruya, I think this is a perfect test for him. It's almost like we're saying, this other young Japanese prospect blew through this guy. Now let's see what you can do, Hernandez or Tsuruya. It's almost like comparing the prospect value of Tsuruya and Taira. Again, acknowledging all the differences, acknowledging that Hernandez is also an evolving fighter that could have learned some things from the Taira fight. perhaps, we saw in that fight, Hernandez really tried to wrestle Taira to the ground. And I wonder if he's going to try and avoid the grappling altogether and try to strike a little bit more. Could be. But I do think this will be a perfect UFC debut for Tetsuro Taira. I keep getting them mixed up. For Ray Tsuruya, and I think that he'll probably get maybe a second round, maybe first round submission. The guy just guns for things so hard. But we did see last weekend, talking about gunning for things really hard, or a couple weekends ago, Jekka versus Weston Wilson. You can't gun for things too hard, especially when your opponent knows what they're doing on the ground. So he can't be reckless. That is the thing with Ray Tsuruya, is that his hyper aggression, like Jekka's, can sometimes lead to things being a little bit sloppy, but it's just his sheer will and forward momentum is just so hard to stand up against, even if he's going to like wobble at a couple points or not totally have finesse in every single moment in transition. It's just like his power and his forward momentum is just too hard to stop. So I expect we'll probably see a finish from Tsuruya in round 1 or 2. Let's go now to... Let's talk about this fight card on Saturday out of South Korea. This is Z Fight Night. So I have really been... You really have seen a lot of... putting the fight card up on the screen right now. You've really seen a lot of the power and influence that Korean Zombie has. Dana White promoting the promotion on his personal Instagram. All these other like big name UFC stars, legends promoting Z Fight Night on their own social medias. And you really just see like, yeah, Korean Zombie has a ton of influence with the UFC. Do we need another Korean promotion right now? I would argue not necessarily. I think that there are a lot of Korean promotions right now in AFC, in Black Combat, in Double G, although they're not always super active, in Road FC. Between that's a lot for one country, for like one market, not to mention all the like co-promotion that goes on. So I don't know that we necessarily need one. And I mean, that's not to say even like the Koreans that compete in Ryzen, there's more and more of those. So it's not that there's like a huge need for a very traditional system, but maybe just one with the, I don't know, organization. Hopefully there's a sense of regularity as well with Z Fight Night. The big thing with Z Fight Night that I'm really happy to see is that it's on Fight Pass. So much of like what I would really like to see from some more Asian promotions is just a way to connect somehow with fans around the world. Even if you're still having your commentary in the local language, just some way to expose fans to that. It's just so hard to find. I mean, to watch these Chinese events, you're watching on Chinese social media or Chinese websites. Japan, a lot of times things are geo-blocked, and it's hard. Even if you're in the US and the time zones are wonky, I am really happy to see that, because that also it's like a broadcast deal, right? Z Fight Night gets money from that. So I don't know, maybe this means that these athletes are going to be paid better. I hope so. And so we'll see from that. The main card, I've put it up on the screen here, that the prelims are not going to be broadcast live, and they are going to be on they're all amateur. So this is the pro main card. Hopefully you can see that okay. So overall, yeah, there's a couple Korean Zombie guys on there that you'll recognize. You've got Kim Han-sol, you've got Park Jae-hyun. The main event there between Kim Han-sol and gosh, I can hardly read that, Fabricio Azevedo from Brazil. I think this is going to be an easy fight for Kim. The matchmaking on this main card is a little bit interesting. A couple of these fights I would consider as squash matches, but keep in mind about this. If you're starting an MMA promotion, your first card is probably going to end up being your worst in terms of overall card quality, because simply the connections that you have with fighters are at their smallest. Also, you've had the least amount of time to build up even like homegrown fighters through your own organization that people recognize. So I cut them a lot of slack here. Kim Han Sol is, I don't know, it seems like he's kind of flirted with retirement. And so if you're giving him an easy fight, I guess I don't really have a problem with that. But and then you've also got Park Jae-hyun fighting this guy here. Gosh, and I can hardly read this. Gu Ji-yoon 3-0. I actually really like this fight. So Park Jae-hyun was, I wouldn't say he had a whole lot of buzz behind him, but he was a prospect that people were at least like, yeah, he should probably get a shot at Road to UFC. He did on short notice, up a weight class, lost that, then came back and fought at UAE Warriors. And I believe that was UAE Warriors, lost that fight. And so he's coming off of 2 straight losses. And he's fighting this guy who's 32 years old and 3-0. I don't know how good his opponent is. It's kind of hard to know. But I do actually really like that on the optics, he's taking a big step back. One thing that annoys me about sometimes the regional scene is you'll have a prospect that either they fight fights that are like way too big for them, or they'll fight like total nobodies that literally do nothing for their, like an 0-0 fighter is what I'm talking about. And sorry, just seeing that Park Jae-hyun, actually the last fight was at AFC. He lost to Abdallah Bieda by TKO in the second round. So I think tune-up fights are not utilized well enough. And a tune-up fight doesn't mean that you fight someone that has never fought in MMA before. It just means that you take a big step back. Too many times we'll see someone that's like, Park's record, which is at one time it was 6-1, and then he fights Shin Haraguchi. Bieda loses back-to-back. Now all of a sudden he's 6-3, and then he goes right back into the fire. Does a fight with like Octagon or Niza and fights a really tough guy, loses again, and then suddenly he's 6-4. When you're that young and you're trying to like build yourself towards something like the UFC, you really got to protect that record. You have to be really smart about the fights that you do and don't take. And so I think like too many fighters will like lose a big fight, with like Road to UFC or Contender Series, and then they'll hop right back in there against a big name thinking like, hey, if I can like beat another really good fighter, then maybe this time I can get into the UFC. But I think, and then this happens and they end up just taking a bunch of losses. This happened also with Lee Jung-hyun going to Ryzen, fighting someone way too good for him in Motoko Shinryu. Really never liked that fight. I thought that Lee should have gone back because he's only like, 21, 22 years old. If you're 30, 31, 32 years old, have at it, but if you're in your young 20s, you don't want to mess up your record. You look at someone like Cho Lun out of China, Tibetan Chinese guy, and I feel like he kind of did this. He took fights that were too big for him, and now his record's kind of messed up. He's got just, 6 or 7 more wins than he does losses, and both in the double digits, and kind of screwed himself over in that way. So I really actually, I have no idea how the fight's going to go. All that to say, but I like the matchmaking here. I think that it is really smart. The 2 fighters I would say on this main card that you want to watch are Yuju Sang, that third fight from the bottom there, and Kim Song-wook. Both guys are still like right in their prime. Yuju Sang, he's undefeated and fighting a guy with a lot more experience than him. I think he is coming off 2 losses, but otherwise, I think that this is a good fight for him. When you are just, I'm pulling up the card on my phone as well. When you're 6-0 and you are kind of on that climb of your career, these are exactly the kind of fights that you want to take. Fights that are winnable against fighters with a lot more experience And so it looks really good on your resume. You know, if you beat him, you get a guy 18-7 on your wins. And so that's solid, but he's also coming off 2 losses and he's a little bit older. So I think this is a good fight for Yuju Sang. I do like this matchmaking a lot. He's fighting a Brazilian guy, which he did fight. I see that he has already fought a Brazilian guy with actually much more experience than this Brazilian guy, Gustavo Wurlitzer, back at AFC in 2022. But he's a guy that I've got my eye on. I thought at one point I thought that he was going to be on Road UFC this year, so maybe next year for that. And then Kim Song Wook, the ever popular fighter that competed on Physical 100 and Road UFC. I think that he's a guy that is like always like 1 or 2 fights away from being right back into like that UFC consideration level. And so in this fight, he is fighting a Japanese guy who's 44 years old, which you actually see a lot of those in Japan. Got a lot more experience than him. 2013-3, Shinji Sasaki, and actually Sasaki's last fight was in 2022 against Patrick Sho Usami, where he lost by TKO. But honestly, he's fought this guy Sasaki's fought a lot of really good fighters. He's been a pro ever since 2005. So I think this will probably be a pretty easy fight for Kim. It still looks good on your record. I would have preferred a little bit better of an opponent. If you're really trying to like make the case of like this guy belongs back in the UFC contention, I think that you maybe want to get a little bit better of an opponent, but I think it still should be a decent fight overall. So that's Zombie Fight Night or Z Fight. I've been told it is Z Fight Night, not Zombie Fight Night. That is the official title. That goes down in US. That's 3 a.m. my time in the Pacific, 6 a.m. Eastern time on UFC Fight Pass. Catch it there. I'm going to try to watch it live as well. All right, now let's talk about one of our favorite topics, One Championships finances. Now, I'll admit that I am certainly no financial expert here. I'm not an economist. And so I'm not the kind of person that can look over all this stuff and just be able to interpret things and point things out. That's why I have relied heavily on people that know better than me. So I'm a subscriber to the Hey Not the Face Substack, where I get to hear John Nash and Steffi Haynes talk about this. They released an episode this morning, which I highly recommend. I'm going to do my best not to even just repeat everything that I heard from there, and I'll like reference them when I remember that's what they said. Jonathan of Kowloon and Kotai on Twitter is also a really good follow as well. He's good at pointing out things. I'm not really sure what his background is, but he's been good at that. And then of course, Deal Street Asia released a article this week as well about that. And Christy Neo used to work for Deal Street Asia. She actually doesn't work there anymore, but she brought the article to light. And so check out that as well. Those 3 sources I've been looking over this week to try and draw some of my own conclusions about what to make of it. So let me start first and show you, by now you've already seen this, but I'm going to put it on the screen anyways. This is what Chatri Sitodong posted earlier this week. Basically, that one will be profitable this year. And as I lean in here to try to read this, cash flow positive this coming quarter 3, or next quarter 4 of this year through a combination of revenue growth and cost optimization. Revenues will approach US $200 million on a run rate basis this year, registering approximately 50% growth as compared to 2023 numbers, which is like, I mean, that's huge, like 50% growth. I don't know what to do with that. And then, of course, he goes into Nielsen, blah, 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 blah. And then thank you, everyone, blah, blah, blah. So the claim here is that they're going to make $200 million in revenue. And then the other claim is that's based on a run rate projection. So what does run rate mean? A run rate is basically where you take a period of time, say like you could say like a month, and then you just multiply that by 12 and say, well, we made this much this month, and so multiplied that by 12, that'll equal 200 million this year. You can see why there would be some fault in that. And again, I'm not an economist. I don't know exactly what Chaudhry is referring to, and so he could watch this and think, well, you have no idea what you're talking about, and he's right. But just using that without specifically showing us the evidence, a run rate, you could take your best day or your best week and say, well, every week or every day, the year is going to be like that. And so we should hit 200 million. You see the obvious fault with that when we don't have the evidence. Here's the problem is that Chaudhry often gets mad at us in the media, fans, for criticizing one's finances, saying that we don't know what we're talking about. But here's the thing. We can only go off of the evidence that we have. And the evidence that we have, like all that we have is Chaudhry's self-reporting on social media posts. We have reporting from Deal Street Asia. We have the financial reported finances that one actually self-reports to, has reported in the past, or this year reported to like the, ACRA, which is the Singapore version of the SEC, or like the kind of like economic board. So that's what we have. And so we can only go off of what we have. And the problem with trusting what Chaudhry says is that he has not built a whole lot of trust in the MMA community. He has constantly promised things that have never panned out, or overinflated things that we found out to be less than true. So it's not that we are always acting in bad faith. It's that it's just frankly really hard to trust him. And so we have to go off of what we see and what we have available. If there was a way for him to really like show some of this data in an unbiased way, maybe that would change things a little bit. But it's really hard to trust that. Also, revenue is not the same as profit. So Christine from Deal Street Asia pointed out, what's your cash burn rate? So like basically you get an investment, and then like how much of that investment do you burn through in the course of a year? If you have $200 million in revenue, which includes, investments, but you're burning through 600 million, say, like, then you're going to come up with a loss still. I know that's a big number, but just an example, like revenue is just like, this is what we took in. It's not what we had left over after all of our expenses and cash burn, things like that. So that's really important. Revenue is always like a one-sided figure that lacks a lot of nuance. So that's a little bit hard to trust as well. All that to say, I also want to give this caveat, and I'll put some more stuff on the screen in just a second. I want to give this caveat, is that the report that came out this week was that in 2022, One Championship's losses had actually shrunk by 40% compared to 2021. And I'm actually inclined to believe that their losses, I mean, it'd be silly. We have the paperwork to show that. But what I'm saying is that doesn't surprise me. And anytime we're talking about something like One Championship, heck, even if we're even talking about your favorite fighter or matchups, things like this, I always talk about removing emotion, or not removing emotion, but acknowledging your own biases. And I think that we have to be really careful when we talk about things like this to not act in bad faith, and to strengthen our own arguments by way of fairness. So I actually do believe that One Championship has moved towards profitability. I think that they actually saved a lot more money, not actually saved and that they have money to spend. But I think that they actually burned through a lot less cash last year. Because here's the thing is the Lupini deal started at the beginning of 2023. And that, I think, changed a lot for One Championship. What did that change? That changed, it shifted their, they were putting off far less MMA fights. MMA fights are by far the most expensive of all their different combat sports that they promote. It's their longest tenured athletes. And to be competitive with other MMA promotions, their contracts do have to be a little bit higher. So they cut back on that. They, week after week, were in Lupini Stadium. I have no idea what that deal was like between them and Lupini, but they basically like moved their whole base of operations from Singapore to Bangkok, and a lot of fighters coming locally from within the country to fight. And so they're able to shrink probably a lot of like travel costs, a lot of overall athlete costs. Muay Thai fighters paid a lot less, much more heavy on the Friday fight side of things. And so I totally doesn't surprise me that they probably even saved more money last year. Whether they're towards profitability, I have no idea. But I think it is, to be fair, we do have to acknowledge that that they probably had a better 2023. Like 2023 was a better year than they've had in a long time. All that to say, an L is still an L, right? So every single year, Chaudhary's like, yeah, we're gonna be profitable this year. We're gonna be profitable, hopefully by the end of this year. And in the meantime, they're getting investors to put in more and more money. They've had this thing going for 12 years now, and still they haven't turned a profit. And so, like, still be turning in L's, still be operating at a loss. Like, you have to have something to show for that. So, it still, I don't think, looks good for investors, even if they are like shifting things. They're still operating at a loss. And so an L is an L. And flipping, I really also doubt that they've been able, like last year in 2020, they ended 2022 with a 20 or 60 million deficit. I have a hard time believing that they cleared that deficit in 2023 and even into this year. A few other things that I wanted to point out from the report, which on the podcast I referenced with John Nash and Stephanie Haynes, they pointed out that, One Championship, they moved their head. I don't know exactly how it works. Some sort of headquarters to the Grand Cayman Islands, which they said is kind of like where you go if you want to do sketchy business. So they moved their headquarters from Singapore to Grand Cayman Islands, and that way they can have a lot more secrecy about their finances. They don't have to report it to the government of Singapore anymore. However, they still self-reported their finances to the Singaporean government, even though they didn't have to. And they hypothesized that the reason that they did that was because they're trying to put up something tangible so that they can show investors that they are gaining ground back. And so I think that there's some intelligence to that, but I also think that, like, when you actually look at the numbers and work through them, like I said, you're still operating at a loss. It's been 12 years. You look at ticket revenue, they only made a little over $700,000 in all of ticket revenue in 2022. And most of those events were in Singapore. About the first third of the year were all closed door events. And so, maybe if they would have had open door, they could have hit $1 million. But guys, like, I mean, UFC makes like $8 million on one show. And Ryzen, apparently, I saw this from Open Note Grappling Guy, like Ryzen makes around $1 million a show. Another Asian promotion in like a wealthy Asian country. So pretty abysmal ticket sales. You got to know that that's like because they give away so many free tickets, they hardly sell things out. So really, like, I mean, that just shows you like the audience demand is just not there. I did a quick search to see like how often is one giving out free tickets, and it was actually a lot more than I understood originally. So, yeah, I just feel like it's like, I'll be honest, One Championship, they actually do have a pretty good product. I have a couple major complaints with the product of things that I would change, but overall, if you sit down and you watch this event, you're going to have like 3-4 hours of entertainment. The pacing is really fast paced. They don't often have boring fights. A lot of really exciting striking fights. A lot of times the MMA fights, I would argue, are lopsided, but that usually leads to a lot of finishes. So there's a lot going for them there. The production is generally good. And so I think that there's a lot that One Championship really has going for them. And I am still kind of like watching these US events, the one in September and the one in November. I looked at the ticket sales for the Denver show in September just about an hour ago. And a couple of things about it seemed really, really odd to me. There were like whole huge sections of the arena where there were no tickets, like a whole like third of the arena. And I'm not talking about the part that's blocked behind the curtain because they have a catwalk. I'm talking about like spots that people can actually buy. Huge sections where it was totally sold out, and then whole huge sections where there'd only be like one ticket bought out of like a block of like 400 seats. And so I have it's kind of a weird, it seems like they've like maybe blocked off some sections where they're trying, where they're not available online. Maybe it's the corporate packaging. Maybe they're giving them away already. I don't know. It's just like everything that One Championship self-reports has glitter on it, and it always looks better than what it really is. So I almost promise you this, that they are going to report a sellout at the Ball Arena on September 6th. But I already have severe skepticism about that. A sellout, I don't even feel like, I feel like calling it a sellout is not honest to what's actually going on if you're giving away that many tickets, because you're not actually selling them. That's the thing about a sellout, is you have to sell tickets. So yeah, that's kind of an update about some One stuff. Some of my thoughts on that. Again, check out today's Hey Not the Face podcast from John Nash and Steffi Haynes. I guess what's next is, and the Deal Street Asia article pointed this out, but like, I think that they are probably awaiting some new investment from Qatar, because some people are positing that they should have burned through all of the rest of their investment by now in 2024. And so they should be pending further investment from Qatar or someone else. They're going to need a lot of money to do that. So, yeah, hopefully if that happens, we'll be able to hear about it. I don't really have the contacts to really know about if, the financial side of things with One, but very interested, and let's stay posted on that. And with that, we head to the question section of today's podcast. All right, no pun to the question. What do you make of MVP's career being wasted on, I don't know what that means, beanmen and librarians? It's a shame that a guy that talented had fights set up at the expense of another person's health. It's a really nuanced question, because I really consider MVP talented and would have probably beat a lot of 170 UFC fighters in the past. But when I see him wasting time, I go, what a waste. Well, it is what it is. You can't change the past now. And here's the thing is that it was Bellator. It's not like, I mean, they had a pretty good 170-pound division when MVP was there, but I don't know what was up with the matchmaking there, if that was intentional to try to just give him home crowd shows where he was likely to get a knockout in front of his hometown or home crowd in London, or if people didn't want to fight him, or if just people weren't available. You know, when you're not the UFC and you don't have 50 fighters on your roster, 50 elite fighters on your roster at welterweight, matchmaking gets harder and harder. And so not every single fight is going to be this like tit for tat, you know, really like even fight between ranked fighters. And so and the other thing is that I think that MVP may still be in his prime. He's a little older. I think he's 37 years old, but I don't think the guy's taken a whole lot of damage. So there's that. And he looked decent in his UFC debut. And I realized that this is the one fight on the main card that I didn't get into. And I hate to be a wet blanket here, but I don't know if this fight, people are excited for this fight with Ian Gary. And I am in like in a divisional standpoint way, but like I actually think this fight, I was hoping this fight wouldn't get made. I'll be honest, because both guys are not super aggressive. They're both pretty good strikers, but neither of them are super aggressive. And I have a feeling this could end up being a little bit of a staring match in some ways. And so, just style wise, I'm not sure if it's going to end up being the most entertaining fight. I kind of wish that each fighter would have fought someone different. I would have even like the Stephen Thompson matchup against either of these guys. I was like, yeah, that's another kind of like point fighter, like counter striker kind of guy, obviously really talented, but putting two of them up against each other, you kind of go into like the Darren Till versus Stephen Thompson territory where there's a lot of stalemate going on. So, but either way, regardless of that, I think that MVP is at least, I think that like this is a really good fighter for him to fight. Ian Gary, some people are saying that he's going to fight for a title, could be a champion someday. I think that he'll definitely get to the top 5, if not a title shot. I'm not totally sure that he's going to be able to go all the way to the gold, but I do think that this is a really tough opponent for MVP. So I'm happy with that in the like divisional standings way. I don't think that this is like a gimme fight or a can fight for MVP at all. I'm actually picking Ian Gary to win this fight. I know that's in the minority, but I think that Ian Gary, especially like leg kicks, things like that, he could just find his way getting ahead of MVP on the scorecards. But I mean, MVP is a special talent too, so we'll see. Don't think that Jekka cutting to bantamweight is the right idea. He didn't lose to Weston because he was smaller. He lost because he couldn't grapple. I don't think he's small for featherweight. Yeah, I'm not really sure to make of this either. If you guys didn't see yesterday, Jekka Sargi on Max Matino's Instagram account, who is one of the brass at the One Pride organization in Indonesia, they went on together on Instagram and said that Jekka was going to be dropping down to bantamweight for his next fight. And I went and looked at the weigh-ins pictures with him squaring off against his last 2 opponents, which are both at featherweight. And Jekka was the shorter of both guys in each one. Weston Wilson is a tall guy, but he's 5'8", and then someone pointed out to me like Rob Font, he's 5'8" as well. Like he's kind of like Rob Font's stature. And the thing with MMA is you're always trying to find what is my weight class? What's the weight class that is optimized for me to be able to succeed the best, where I can where I can have the biggest size advantage without drawing away from my vitality, from my strengths. And for Jekka, fighting in Indonesia, I don't think he cut a whole lot of weight. Most of those guys in Indonesia don't cut a whole lot of weight. So he was already fighting above his natural weight class. He's fighting at lightweight, drops down to featherweight once he gets into the UFC. And then I'm guessing maybe he's talked to some folks that believe like, hey, I think we can actually get a little bit more out of you to where you have a pretty good size advantage against these guys at bantamweight. In that case, I think that's great. I don't necessarily think that he is thinking like, if I just drop down the bantamweight that I'm going to be able to go on this tear, or like responding to a loss of like, well, the only reason I lost was because I was too small. I think he's maybe just still trying to figure out like what size do I want to be at in the cage. So I don't see anything wrong with that. Obviously, Jekka knows his body far better than any of us do and knows his own capabilities. So I can't really be one to criticize that, especially when there are fighters his same height at the weight class below, when he does look like the smaller fighter at featherweight, at least by a little bit. So yeah, I don't hate it. And I also don't think that he's necessarily like what you said, like, I don't know that he's necessarily saying that I lost that fight because I was too small. I agree. He was far too aggressive and he was negligent in his grappling. That was why he lost the fight. But having a size disadvantage definitely doesn't help. So he knows his body. We'll see what happens. Do I know so William Open Note with Open Note Grappling did a breakdown on Ray Tsuruya with his creative overhook work. Can tag you, haven't seen it. I've seen it, I haven't watched it yet. Thank you, though. Someone pointed out that since UFC 306 is rebranded, perhaps they'd make a new UFC 306 just for McGregor. Oh, that is really interesting. Remember, Ariel said they wanted to make a whole new pay-per-view for his fight. And I think that's, yeah, the fall schedule of pay-per-view is already really crowded. So you've got a pay-per-view on August 17th. Then you've got one 3 weeks later. 3 weeks? Or is that just, yeah, 3 weeks later on September 6th. And then exactly a month later, you have one August 5th, Salt Lake City. And then probably like, and then, gosh, there's two in October. And then there's, I think the New York one is like November 9th. And then the December one, I think will probably be like December 10th, something like that. And most likely Las Vegas. So it's really packed. October, you got two. Otherwise, they're like 3 to 4 weeks apart. It means that you're going to have to have like almost back-to-back pay-per-view weeks at some point. And I also looked at, I kind of mapped out the UFC schedule for the rest of the year, seeing like what weekends are even open. Granted, I mean, they could definitely shift things around for Conor McGregor, but in October, you only have two open weekends, the 14th, or sorry, let's start with September. September 7th, Apex, September 14th, T-Mobile in Las Vegas, and then September 28th is Paris. You can't move those. I mean, you can move the Apex one, but so you have September 21st open. October, the first and last weekends are pay-per-views already, leaving the 14th. Oh, that's not right. Well, the 12th and the 19th are open in October. I've wondered, not reported, but I've wondered if October 19th might be a Macau date. Talked about that on last week's show. November, you have the 2nd and the 16th open, whereas the 9th is most likely New York City. So you got 2 days in November there. They usually don't have one on the American Thanksgiving week, although maybe they would do that if, like last year, was it like PFL that had one Thanksgiving week? I think that's honestly probably a pretty good time to do it, just because you already have lots of people that are gathered together, which is optimal occasion for a pay-per-view. So maybe they do it the last weekend of November. September, the schedule is always real, or December, the schedule is always real tight. You just got the 7th, the 14th, and 21st, and then they take off for the rest of the year. Unless they tried to do like an end of year pay-per-view with Conor McGregor, or did Conor McGregor at the beginning of December and then did an end of year pay-per-view, something like that, to try to space things out. That's where I think you could, I think November, December makes the most sense for a pay-per-view. Squeezing it in August, September, October, you're probably going to be like back to back with another pay-per-view weekend. But that is really interesting. I didn't think about that maybe Noche UFC is just kind of like meant to be its own event, not a fight night. Not it is a pay-per-view, but not a numbered pay-per-view. Although like the whole Riyadh thing with Riyadh season sponsoring UFC 306, that happened way before Conor McGregor pulled out. So I don't think like they didn't change that so that they could free up a number. So I'm not really sure about that, but unless if they put that on free TV, which I doubt they will, that would be another way around it though. If you just like decided to take the L, find some way to like compensate fighters that were supposed to get pay-per-view points, like maybe Sean O'Malley, perhaps Alexa Grasso. And this is just assuming that they'll be on that card, but very interesting. Got into an argument with a guy defending an upstart journalism who's, oh yeah, I know you're talking about here. Defending because he's been making wrong fight announcements all week. Do you understand why people defend these upstarts who want to get into MMA journalism but are really bad at what they do? So I have two sides of this. On the one side, this is the risk that you take when reporting a fight, especially a big fight. When you report a fight, you are opening yourself up to criticism, and it's high highs and low lows. If you report a fight, you're 100% sure it's going to happen, and it happens. It feels great, and you are excited. You got to contribute to the sport. You got to give people good news, hopefully good news, and probably does great things for your own following as well. It's cool to be able to have that connection, all of that. That's great. But the low side of that is that if you get it wrong, then people come after you, people attack your integrity, people are slower to trust you. And that is tough because you feel like the eyes of the whole community are pointed at you and people have their swords drawn. So when you report a fight, you are opening yourself up to that. And don't report a big fight unless you are fully accepting of that kind of criticism, even if you feel like the fight is solid and you feel totally confident in your sources. So on the one hand, it's like I don't necessarily have sympathy for that guy. On the other hand, like the nature of the world that we live in is that so few people are classically trained or trained to report fights the right way. And I'm putting myself in that same boat, is that you get so many of these like false start announcements. And I even hesitate using the word fake news just because like, it's like the news was kind of half true, or like it was, it got a little bit away and then it got, and also the only reason that we use that term is because it was popularized by a certain former American president. So in a way, it's like I feel for the guy of like, yeah, you really messed up there, especially when you do it again and again. It's kind of like, oh man, like I really wish you would have learned your lesson. I do appreciate that I saw the guy that you're referring to, and I at least appreciate that he acknowledged his mistake. Sometimes people go on the offensive when people come at them like that, or they don't handle it well. It's like, if that happens to you, yes, the professional thing to do is acknowledge your mistake. And I've reported a big fight falsely in the past. And I did the big mistake of checking with one source and not two, and then reporting a fight. And after that happened, I promised myself that I was never, ever going to, no matter how much I trusted that one source, which I did a lot. That was a lights out source for me. That I was never going to go off of one person's word again. Even if it meant, even if I had like, confirmation of a Zhang Wei Li fight, I wouldn't report it just to I don't know. It's not worth it. So in those situations, I usually just like, I don't usually engage with people like that. I mean, it's like, okay, I can see that you've learned your lesson. Now in your position, it's going to take a while to rebuild trust. And exactly what he said he wanted to do, he wanted to take a step back from reporting fights to like grow in journalism. Like, yeah, that's what you got to do. You need to find other ways to rebuild trust with the public. You need to set some better standards for yourself. Maybe I don't even need to tell you that, but like, yeah. So I don't, defending that kind of thing. It's like, I don't know. I'd just rather not get in the middle of it. People make mistakes, but like, if you're going, this is not like, oops, I should have given you a nickel, but I gave you a penny in change. It's not like that kind of mistake at your job. Like, this is the UFC. This is the highest level of the sport. And those were big fights, saying that Kevin Holland was going to fight Roman Dolidze at, or who is it? Somebody. Kevin Holland was going to fight somebody at, or Jared Cannonier at UFC Denver. Like, that's a big fight. Like, you can't just throw those out there. So you open yourself up for that criticism for sure. As you know, I'm a big fan of Kareem Zidane. I just read a column of his, and I think his question is interesting. Do you agree that the fan is no longer the UFC's primary customer, but governments and the Saudis? He shows glaring evidence that the UFC and TKO are getting government contracts to produce content. In a way, yes, I think that is ultimately where the big bucks come from. However, I don't think that that's a long-term sustainable strategy. So the UFC probably got a ton of money from the Saudis to host an event in Riyadh last weekend. They also got money from the Saudis sponsoring UFC Noche, and they're hoping to have a bigger event next year as well in Saudi Arabia. So they're getting a lot of money from the Saudis. But the thing is that what do the Saudis get out of this? It's like, yeah, the UFC gets a lot of money, but what do the governments get out of this? They get what they are hoping to do. The governments are hoping to build up their tourism. They're hoping to bring people from outside of these cities, from outside the country to fly in, spend money in their cities. They really like it when the UFC can sell out an arena. Because it generates a lot of money for the arena, pumps a ton of money into the local economy. So that's why it's like, yeah, UFC is going to go back to Salt Lake City again. And potentially they could put a big fight like Max Holloway versus Ilia Topuria. They're going to put on a big fight card there to counterbalance these, much, much, much weaker Apex shows. So the UFC is trying to deliver on their end. The thing is, though, is that has to be worth it for these local governments. And I think that in time, some of these big spenders around the world are going to realize it's not worth it for them. I think also there is a lot of demand built up from the pandemic where the UFC is able to charge much higher prices. And I wonder if some of that's going to diminish over time. So I think that we are in a unique era. We went from the COVID era and now we're kind of, I don't know if we're at the end of like, it's either Apex or it's huge mega site fees era. I saw Guilherme Cruz with MMA Fighting say yesterday that UFC isn't going to do a show in Sao Paulo this year just because Sao Paulo can't afford the site fees that the UFC is asking for. And which is a big bummer because I would love to see the UFC just like keep investing in the live market in Brazil. But I think that I do wonder if eventually that's going to even out a little bit. The demand will start to weaken if like Salt Lake City, Miami, and I think New York will probably always be there. Las Vegas will always be there. Australia, places like that. UAE, it'll be interesting to see how having both Saudi Arabia and the UAE, how those will work together if eventually one will win out. But I wonder if eventually, and it's like this event in Saudi Arabia last weekend, they sold 12,000 tickets. I'm not sure what the Kingdom Arena capacity is, but I think it's probably close to around 30,000 because Turkey Al Sheikh said that they wanted to do a show where they sell 30,000 tickets. So they didn't sell at the arena. They sold 12,000 tickets. So like, is the demand even there in Saudi Arabia? Is this a long-term investment? I don't know. But I do have questions whether that's sustainable or not. What are some of your fluid thoughts on the UFC 303 main event? Seems too far removed from UFC 300, which Yuri and Alex both fought in. Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like Alex Pereira is a lock. In my heart, I feel that way. Just it seems like the man is on fire, and his only loss in a long time was to Adesanya. He goes up in weight, and he's looked amazing at light heavyweight. He's like probably the hottest fighter in the whole UFC right now. Seems like he can't miss every event. Super entertaining. One of the UFC's biggest stars. I'm not sure if he's actually the biggest or not, but yeah, just super active, gives the fans what they want. And I feel like, and highly, highly skilled too. And I feel like Yuri has so many defensive liabilities on the feet that it's too hard for me to not pick Alex Pereira. But I mean, Yuri's, can be kind of a zombie-like fighter. He can get hurt badly, come back again and again and again. His style can be really wacky and really aggressive and reckless. And so like, because of that, he's never a guy that you can totally count out. But I just feel like Pereira right now is too hot, and the style matchup is just too good, especially since he's already knocked out Yuri Prochazka. What was that, like 2 fights ago? So it's just too hard. It's too hard for me to pick against him. But I'm looking forward to watching it. I just feel like it's not a like light heavyweight main event where I'm like, ooh, yeah, I don't know who's going to win that. It's just like 2 guys that you love to watch literally every single time. And so it's good for that reason. And Yuri's deserving of the shot. He's always been right up there near the top, won the belt, lost it, and then had an amazing fight. A good performance against, was Alexander Rakic back at UFC 300. So it is what it is, but I think it goes to Pereira. Not sure if you saw, but Zhang Weili just finished filming a movie. Looks like she's starring in it. Some Chinese MMA fans think she's not motivated anymore. What measures motivation? Because I don't think so. Since last year, she does a lot of reality show work for Chinese television. Yeah, I mean, motivation really just, there's no measure for that. It's what are your performance like? Your performances like? Her performances have been pretty good recently. So it's hard to, it's like, yeah, she's doing that. And then once it's time to train for the next fight, like you all know, she's locked in. She sells her life away to preparing for the next fight. So I don't doubt that motivation anymore. And because of how intentionally she locks herself in to each training camp, it also makes sense to me that it would be smart for her to have periods where she disengages from that, because I don't think you should be locked in that intensely all the time, 12 months of the year. It'd be interesting. I've been trying to figure out the timing on her next fight. Not that I've been asking around, but I'm just trying to think through like what makes the most sense. And ultimately, I think that the UFC will probably just put her as the co-main on some random event from October to December against Suarez. Or, I mean, they could put her as the main event at a UFC Macau show. I would love to see that, but ultimately, yeah, it's like maybe UFC 307. I could definitely see that. UFC 308, be kind of a weird. That's the Abu Dhabi one, kind of a weird one. I guess they could do New York as well. So I'm guessing probably one of those two shows, 307 or 309, they'll probably put her on that. I noticed that people have been plagiarizing Miguel Class's work, and the analyst community is just going after him. What's your take on plagiarizing analysis and pretending that it's yours? Miguel said on his podcast that he and many other analysts can recognize patterns, make videos about it, and it's like the skill of a plumber. But guys that rip off content really spit in the face of guys like Miguel who are good at analyzing fights. And do I find go shaming people for plagiarism funny? It's not really. I would say not really. It's not really my style. But again, like if you do that, you are again opening yourself up to criticism. It's very bold to do that. People say that's cowardly. I'm like, no, it's bold, because like you're probably going to get found out, and you're going to get walloped for it. Forget any kind of like MMA media career that you want to have with anybody else. My response to those kind of things is just to block, mute and block. And then I move on with my day. I block just because I don't want them copying any of my content, and I don't need them to follow me. I'm happy with my follower count right now, and I don't need them. So if you are going to do that, then I'm just going to block you and move on. But yeah, the thing is that there's no, if you cheat in school, if you plagiarize someone's paper and you get caught, there's huge penalties for that. You'll probably get expelled. If you do that on Twitter, Twitter doesn't care if you do that. So, or really on social media, doesn't all that penalize you? Although some social networks actually can recognize if you posted the same thing as someone else, and they'll decrease your reach for that. Twitter doesn't seem to be like that, and would probably be pretty tricky to exactly parse that out. So if there's no penalty, it's like taking fouls in MMA. It's like, if you don't get in trouble for it, then why would you not do it? And I think that's the way people think. But yep, block and move on. That's what I would do. How come Dana goes out of his way to promote Korean Zombie's promotion? I thought he hates that kind of thing. Not really sure what you're talking about there. He loves Korean Zombie, and Zombie's promotion is on Fight Pass too. So I think the idea with that is that we can invest in the Korean MMA fan market. If we can have a stable promotion that's on Fight Pass, give people something regular, and then, with like Fight Pass, all of those shows, they sign a deal with the UFC that, like, I'm not sure what all the particulars are, but the UFC can, like, if they need someone on short notice, they can grab someone from LFA or UAE Warriors or now Zombie Fight Night, or like it was with Invicta, they can just like grab people. And so, and again, I don't know if there's any other additional hurdles to them doing that, but so it's a pipeline is what it is. And because of that, Korean fighters may really want to fight for Zombie's promotion, and everyone wins from it, right? So Dana loves the Korean Zombie. Always been a fighter to entertain. Really well loved in Korea. They've done a lot for them, for Zombie. Zombie's done a lot for him. And so I wasn't surprised. I just hadn't seen Dana do that kind of promotion for other Fight Pass promotions. I'm one of the few here that care about the PFL, mainly Linton Vassell. Why am I seeing an advertisement about Don Davis saying that MMA is a duopoly and it's the UFC and the PFL? Who is that for? Investors? I mean, anytime you're like you're running off of investors, everything has to have that glitter on it, you know? And you can always find the stats out there that put you on par with the UFC, or you can find a certain way to interpret those stats to put you on par with the UFC. You and I know that the PFL is not a duopoly, and to be fair, I care about the PFL too. I hope that there's a lot of problems with their product, but there's also a lot of good things about it. And I hope that they figure it out. I hope that they streamline things. I hope that Bellator goes away at the end of the year and things are simpler next year, and that they're able to streamline everything, continue to work out the kinks, make it a better product for fans, this and that. But they are far from a duopoly. And appearance-wise, you might be fooled into thinking that. Just, you know, the level of production in PFL, and it's on ESPN, and but you and I both know, it's not a duopoly. It's mainly just there for and what he's pulling from is the Fight Matrix stats, where they're like, well, like I forget what it was, but it's like a pretty high number of like, we've got what, like 30% or 50% of the top 50 ranked fighters in every weight class, something like that. I butchered that, but and it's like, that's why he's calling it a duopoly. They might be there someday, but I personally doubt it. But more power to you, Don. I like Korean Zombie, and all the Korean Zombie gym and stun gun guys got favorable matchups. Yeah, they kind of did. They did. I read a grappling article that stated biting more than you can chew in MMA is dangerous, and he cited Sage Northcutt versus Cosmo as an example. Do you agree with that? Sage was sidelined for 4 years. Yeah, exactly. And I kind of talked about this a little bit when I was talking about Z Fight Night, the Park Jae-hyun video, or the Park Jae-hyun fight, where you have to be really, really smart when you're young and trying to build your way up. It's okay to sometimes, like, you get tested and you fail the test, so you got to go back to the drawing board. I mean, everyone not named Khabib Nurmagomedov has taken a loss before. That's okay. But you have to be smart about the matchups that you choose. It's okay to turn down fights. It's okay to be picky, because you don't want to be in a situation like Sage, where you fight this elite kickboxer and get smashed for it, or you end up having a 6-5 record, and then you're like, shoot, what do I do now? Just go back to the regional scene and beat up cans to try to like have a better record. You don't want to be there. And so, yeah, a lot of people bite off more than they can chew. They knock out a couple guys on the regional scene with 1-2 records, and then suddenly they get a lot of confidence. They think they can beat anybody. That's why I'm always like more in favor of prospects moving along slowly than taking the rocket ship to the top. Fatima Klein, as huge of a fan personally as I am of her, and one of the few fighters you'll hear me say that I am a fan of, I am okay with her taking the slow route, even though people have been calling for her to go to Contender Series or UFC for a long time. Tetsura Taira, I was happy to see how many like low-level prelim fights he got. All these guys that have a bunch of hype behind them, I'm always just like, take the slow route. Let yourself build, fill in as many holes as you can. are much better to be over prepared for the test than under prepared. So yeah, don't bite off more than you can chew. One Championship's financials is one of my favorite topics. Mine too. I just listened to the Hey Not the Face podcast. So you talking about this is great. Yeah, glad you listened to it. Really helpful. I subscribed to their Substack this week, just $5 a month, and you get like, I mean, that's pretty like worth it to me to like get, what is it? Maybe like one a week where they talk for an hour. That seems like pretty valuable to me. So I would highly recommend. And about Ian Gary, if we ignore his peculiar wife and copycat Connor personality, he's actually a good game planner, as pointed out by Jack Slack. Maybe not as good as Leon or Jong, but good, right? That's exactly how I feel. A lot of weird stuff that goes on outside of the cage. Some of that I think is, it's the fans kind of taking it to a weird place, but weird nonetheless. And I do think he is better than people think. And yes, has had some pretty good game plans, and I think that's spot on. And like you said, I'm not totally certain that he is championship level material just yet. I'd love to see him finish some more people. That's for sure. That's why it's like sometimes he can take a little bit more conservative approaches to fights, but would love to see him finish a little bit more. I don't know that we'll get that against MVP, but who knows? Who knows? Just hate one because they're abandoning MMA so much right now. I'm surprised not a lot of fighters kind of go on riot for it. Well, they can't, right? Because One Championship has a non-disparagement clause in their contracts. Fighters are legally not able to talk shit about One Championship, or else they could get sued for it. So that, and that's like, as far as I know, that's even after you're out of contract. It's like a forever thing. So there's been a couple here and there that have, and I'm not really sure how that all shook out, but yeah, that's why you don't hear people talk. I mean, you hear UFC fighters talking about how they don't like their contract, or they don't like how the UFC does this or that all the time. And I don't know that the UFC cares that much. One Championship is a different game. Reputation is everything for them. Looking like they're a really successful organization where everyone's happy is super important to them, because they have to get investors. That's not as big of a deal for the UFC. So it wouldn't bother me, like for them abandoning MMA, that wouldn't bother me a whole lot. I actually think that they would be smart to totally abandon MMA and just focus on their striking arts. But the part that really upsets me is keeping MMA, but not giving fighters fights and just putting them on the shelf. That is what really pisses me off. That's why I get so sick and tired of hearing fighter after fighter, manager after manager tell me that they're wasting the best years of their career. And that one is just like wrecking fighter after fighter, career after career, by putting them on the shelf. And I've heard that firsthand over and over and over again, to where I've like pretty much, I've lost any love or desire to like present one in a good light. I'm just like fed up with the promotion by now because of that. I love the fighters though. And so I'll always have the fighters side, support them, try to do what's best for them. If I can like sometimes speak on their behalf, things that they've told me, frustrations that they've told me, but can't say out loud because they're going to get in trouble. I'm like, well, I haven't signed a contract. So I'll let people know that you're upset with the organization. But wouldn't it be more endearing if Chaudhry, when he was wrong, to admit that he was wrong and apologize? For example, say something like, we promised this, but we weren't able to push it through because of X. I think so. They said that they were hoping to have 4 US events this year. They're having 2. They said that they expected to have events in Arizona and Florida. No such events. They said that they were going to have an event in Japan this year, a second event in Japan this year. That is probably not happening. I read an article, a blog post by Shinya Aoki, saying that there was an event planned for September, but it's not happening now. Not sure if it's going to happen this year at all. So it just feels like promise after promise after promise goes unfulfilled. The open weight Muay Thai tournament, hyped up really big, then just like disappears into the wind. It's just thing after thing after thing gets taken away. And so it's hard. I agree. I feel like having a good relationship with fans would really be served by a little bit more honesty from Chatri. How has the UFC become the welfare king? Is the money fans spend on UFC just a drop in the bucket compared to the sponsors they have? Yeah, I'm not sure if I totally understand the question, but earlier I had said that like these deals that they have with governments, these site fees, they really only pay off if fans come to the events, right? So they can't totally just be like, yeah, this is only about the site fees. Like, if UFC puts an event on in Riyadh and say only 5,000 people show up and then they come back and forth, it's like, okay, Riyadh's not going to keep giving you money. They actually have to draw people to these events. The interesting thing will be the ESPN deal, not ESPN or whoever they sign with, Netflix, whomever, for the new media rights deal. Is ESPN, if they try to re-sign at the UFC, are they going to be like, hey, like we'd like some better Apex cards or no Apex cards? Are they gonna put their foot down and like try to like improve the viewership numbers in some ways, put some stipulations like, hey, like just because you have an event that says UFC on it, like it doesn't mean we're going to give you all this money. So the fans do still matter. I do want to add that caveat. Viewership matters, live gate attendance, all that stuff still matters. That is the piece of the site fee conversation that we still need to emphasize. Bit out of topic. Nothing's out of topic, my man. You remember mentioned how Bilal is hooked up with CFFC. He's teammate with Miranda Granger. Oh, okay. There you go. She's VP for CFFC, all head coached by Charles Pearson. Miranda Granger. So that makes sense. But I thought Miranda Granger was trained in the Northeast, which would make sense if she works for CFFC. And I thought that Bilal Hassan trained in Washington State. So, okay, Miranda Granger. No, they actually both, I looked her up on Tapology. She actually trains out of Charlie's Combat Club in Everett, Washington, which is near Seattle. And did she ever fight for CFFC? She did. She fought twice for CFFC. I guess now my question is, what is Miranda Granger's connection with CFFC? Like, I mean, you fought twice for them. How did you get that deal? Maybe perhaps she was training in the Northeast at that time, but overall, that does make a little bit more sense how Bilal Hassan got that opportunity. Who is the senior manager for one? Kind of funny. Oh, coached by Charles Pearson, who is senior manager for one. Kind of funny to connect it all. Interesting. Don't know what that means. Interesting. Are you monetized? Trying to donate, but it won't let me. Maybe it's YouTube. I don't know if I have that enabled yet. I really appreciate that. I actually was thinking about that today. I hadn't turned on, or I hadn't done anything with that, or at least wasn't expecting anything with like live donations, simply because being a small podcast, I wasn't totally sure how to work that out. I mean, good grief, I've still got like 20 questions. I think for the longest time, I've just wanted to have a totally free experience for the podcast. And, I know Luke Thomas does it. Like if you donate, kind of like guarantees that your question will get asked. And so I could do something like that. I feel like probably in the near future. I really appreciate that. I really do from the bottom of my heart. I'm obviously monetized with ads, so there's that side of it. But that's something I'll consider. Thanks again, though. Is it good that we'll have a week off next week? Yeah, I think so. I mean, June's been crazy. A week off is, I think, nice when we have it. I'm also really thankful. So next week, I'm not totally sure if there'll be a show next week because I'm planning on moving next week near the end of the week. And so that kind of actually works out great for me because there's really almost no MMA all weekend. And so it's kind of an open week for me in that sense. With moving, I'll let you know if there's going to be a show or not. But hopefully my hope is that, so every week I have to like set up the tripod and get everything just right. I'll have more space at my next place. So I'll be able to have a studio up 24/7 because of that. Hopefully, and I haven't actually been to the space yet. Future roommate has looked at a space kind of long, whatever. I haven't been there yet, but I'm hoping that I'll be able to just create a overall better looking space for videos, for podcasts, things like that. Hopefully lighting will all be good. Green chair. I mean, all this stuff will still be at least available to me, but hopefully that'll be an upgrade. I'll also get a new laptop next month as well. So a couple upgrades coming down the pipe. Mick Maynard and Sean Shelby, not the best matchmakers. We had 11 months of consistently bad UFC cards, save for UFC 300. Not really. Well, that's a good question. I think that Mick Maynard is a pretty good matchmaker overall. Sometimes some of the upper weight classes confuse me a little bit, like the matchups. I mean, and how much of that is just like the talent not always being like as exciting. I mean, I would argue that like, and for my taste, like the lighter weight classes are more exciting. Just in general, if you watch a flyweight fight, if you watch a featherweight fight, it's probably going to be more of an exciting fight in general than like a middleweight, a light heavyweight, or a heavyweight fight. And so there could be that. I mean, I don't know. I think in general, like, and this goes back to the site fees conversation, right? So in general, they are trying to stack up their best cards for the places that pay really big site fees, and then the leftovers get used for the Apex events. I would not say all the events were consistently bad. There were definitely some like mediocre cards. I mean, the Canada card was okay. We had the Brazil card, which was for the most part pretty entertaining. I think that there's more at play than just that. They have been matchmakers for a long time, that's for sure, in the UFC. I think it was just the stretch, honestly, of what was available. Sometimes you have these periods of time where it's like, yeah, there's not a lot of big stars. A lot of our biggest stars are unavailable. People keep getting injured. And it's like, what do we have left? What do we have available? Canada is coming at us with all this money, but we don't really have like a big ticket Canadian fighter. So we're going to fill out the fight card with Canadians. And essentially it's just going to be a whole fight card of prelims. So it's like that. The site fee and Apex situation, I think, also messes with the quality of cards sometimes. And every once in a while, you get a really good card, a really good pay-per-view card, where it's like, yeah, the UFC really went out of their way. I mean, the another good card was was that Newark? What was UFC 290? The Miami card. That was a pretty good card too. They stacked that pretty thoroughly as well. So I think it's almost more of a function of just the economic situation of how they choose locations. And man, there's a lot more here. I'm gonna do a few more. Asking, it's a great question. Were you shamed on X Twitter when you made a mistake on that fight announcement? I remember someone called it fake news, and that was like frustrating because I was like, I mean, technically yes, but like I had like really I had like 100% confirmation, what I thought was 100% confirmation from the Song Yadong side, from like firsthand kind of stuff, and then Song Yadong eventually came out later and said like, yeah, like that fight was offered, it was supposed to be Peter Yan, like that was true, and so I felt a little bit of vindication with that. Fortunately, I think I dodged the bullet. It was mainly my own self-criticism, but I think there was a couple times it wasn't like pointed at me. Like fortunately in that situation, like it was like people didn't know where the report came from. And so, and then they dismissed it. But so I think I dodged a bullet there, and I'm thankful that I wasn't roasted. Maybe some people wanted to, but they held back, and just personally, I appreciate that. But again, that's the risk you run when you put something out there. Reporting a fight is an extremely vulnerable thing to do. I mean, unless you're Ariel Helwani and you like literally called both fighters in the span of 10 minutes and they said, I've signed the contract, and there's really no way to mess it up. But otherwise, like, yeah, there's, even if you like get confirmation from both sides, there's like a chance that like the fight doesn't end up panning out, or maybe a day later one fighter gets injured and the fight's off, and then it never like sees the actual light of day of like showing up on the ESPN website or being reported by the UFC. And then like later, you know, someone asked Dana about it and he's like, oh yeah, it was all bullshit, blah, 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 you know? So it's a very vulnerable place to put yourself, which personally, I've just like, yeah, I don't want to make the same mistake twice, for sure. To build on James' point, what do you think of abrasive, cynical personalities using their following to shame these people so more people shame them? And yeah, you love both those guys, Slack and Ghost, and I do as well. Like I said, it's not my style. I block and I move on, but I do think that you do have to be aware of your own influence and how people, if you post something that, and you have a following, that people are going to follow you, and they may be even much less forgiving or mature than you were. So you do have to understand the power of your own influence. And a lot of times, at least in my case, like I didn't need anybody to come after me with a knife to my throat telling me that I messed up. My own like self-critical nature did all of that for me. and I realized that I couldn't make the same mistake a second time. And so I didn't need that. But yeah, I don't love it, to be honest. Yeah, I don't love it. I think you're correct about Alex Pereira being one of the UFC's biggest stars. So follow-up question, why not stack the card with him under a Conor card? The UFC will have more ops when scrambling. Well, the thing with the Conor cards is that, and it's been the same way probably for like 5 years, I want to say, Conor McGregor main event, usually a non-title fight. Everything under that, there's like no fight. There may be a solid co-main, but other than that, it's like a lot of like fight night co-main kind of stuff, and then sometimes weaker prelims. They stacked it a little bit better this time, being International Fight Week, but the reason they do that, I think it's all a pay-per-view points thing, is just like when it's Conor McGregor, they want it to be the Conor McGregor show. And if you can have a big pay-per-view with Alex Pereira at the very top, where it's the Alex Pereira show, do that, and then have a separate show with Conor McGregor on there. And it's like Alex Pereira just fought in April, big show. He was probably, I don't know what his weight was, probably taking some time off, maybe expecting to fight later in the summer, if not the fall. And so he probably wasn't the first guy that they were like they probably didn't cross their mind. I just think they prefer with like the way the pay-per-view stuff all shakes out. It could even be a deal with Conor McGregor of like, hey, you're not, when it's your pay-per-view, you're not going to have to split pay-per-view points with anybody else. It's all going to be 100% yours because you're our biggest star, and we want you to be able to cash out that way. So I think that's why they don't do that. Sure, let's do a few more. Do you think that a fighter can get burned out if they are too motivated? Other than Wei, can you give me any other examples? Other examples? I mean, that's so hard to gauge. Like, I mean, you see, like, I'm thinking about how like active fighters like Donald Cerrone or Jim Miller have been throughout their whole career. The other side of it is, is that a lot of fighters get so addicted, and I like truly mean that, and like what that word actually means. They get addicted to like the fighter lifestyle, the training, the hype, the buildup, what that does for their endorphins, getting ready for a fight, and then the walk to the cage, the whole experience, that they actually have a hard time disconnecting from that. And I think it's almost like rare that you see fighters allow themselves extended periods of time off. Because you see these fighters that retire and then they're like, man, I just missed that feeling so bad. I had to come back to competition. And so I think that more often than not, you see fighters get addicted to that. And it's also like their pay. It's like literally their job. And so you can't always afford to like take a lot of time off because you won't get paid. But that is an interesting question. I'm trying to think of another example of someone that got burnt out on fighting. I mean, you'll see fighters like plateau a lot, where it seems like they haven't really improved. They're just kind of stuck in a rut. I've seen that a little bit from like a Ovince St. Preux a little bit. It's like, yeah, you're kind of stuck at the same place your whole career. So yeah, I have to think more about that. Good question though. Meant to say that Dana hates other promotions like Bellator or One, so it's odd that he promotes his old fighters, promoters like Gamebred or Korean Zombie. Well, I think those are a little bit different camps of like Bellator, PFL. I know it's not a duopoly, but like the mission of what's the mission of Bellator or PFL? They are actually or One. They're actually trying to be competitors with the UFC. A promotion that's literally under the Fight Pass banner. Like literally, if a fighter gets really good under that banner to the UFC level, the UFC contractually has the right to snatch that fighter up for their own. So it's literally not any kind of threat. And I do think that it's part of the reason UFC Fight Pass exists, right? To give, because the UFC needs regional promotions, regional MMA to flourish in order for them to do their thing, in order for them to be able to have Contender Series every year. They've got to have flourishing regional promotions, CFC, LFA, CES, Uriah Faber's A1 Combat, Shudo Brazil. Ryzen's kind of an interesting one because they really actually seem like they are competing with the UFC for like, so those are all like those kind of shows. But then I would say a level up where it's not just like country specific, but it's more like almost like continent or like subcontinent specific, talking about your octagons, your KSW, your Ryzen, where there are several elite fighters, and because of their structure as a promotion, they're actually able to compete with the UFC in terms of pay for fighters. I don't know that you're going to see Dana really like propping them up, especially since they're not on Fight Pass. But you know, Dana has friendly relations with Nobuyuki Sakakibara. They've met. They had the deal with Kai Asakura, or perhaps Asakura just fought out his contract. Not totally sure there, but I mean, yeah, if it's Northeastern MMA, Northeastern US MMA is nowhere close to trying to compete with the UFC. The LFA, their mission is to basically just give fighters experience so that they can go to the UFC or PFL, although it's mostly UFC. Would love for them just to be a 4-ounce. What you're talking about, one championship, I'm guessing, just to be a 4-ounce kickboxing and Muay Thai promotion and remove MMA and grappling, because 4-ounce striking in a ring is fantastic. Yeah, I also agree. I think they would be able to cut so much of their expenses, like some of their biggest, like if one could like take off. I think, I don't know what the market is in the US for kickboxing and Muay Thai. History has shown that it's not huge for kickboxing for whatever reason, but like, do you need the US market? Like, put shows on in Europe, in North Africa, in Japan, in China with kickboxing and Muay Thai, in Thailand, and you're set. Like, I agree. And then I've said this many times before, but I would love, cut MMA, spin off grappling into its own series, and make the format much more appropriate for grappling. And I think one championship could like fly to the moon. I don't know what's keeping them holding on to MMA. Maybe it's just the market in terms of like wanting to get the US fans and bring them along. But that's what I would do if I ran one championship. And then you said, I've also been reading some Paul Gift and listening to John Nash. Thoughts on the antitrust lawsuit being blocked by the judge? Good, because the fighters can get more money. I don't have a whole lot of thoughts on that per se. I like you, my thoughts are really mostly just recycled from hearing people like that. But yeah, we'll see what happens. We'll see if they will get anything more out of it. I tend to be more pessimistic on it, that maybe it'll amount to a little bit more money, but nothing else is going to come from it. But I'll just have to see, you know. I appreciate the judge pushing back on that, though. All right. It looks like we're at the end here. When I say welfare, it means they have multi deals with sponsors, so they're on welfare checks. So many fans money doesn't matter. Yeah, I see what you're saying there. Want to donate to you at some point, even if it's a small gift for covering Asian MMA and being thoughtful. Well, you are the real MVP. Appreciate that. Also, congrats on Go Sang You, Aaron B, and Drake Riggs now. Such an odd company. I saw that too. I was like, these guys do a lot more heavy lifting than I do, but I appreciate that support as always. As much as I also really appreciate your all support as well. I'm sorting through a lot of things in life, and I'm also, like I said, I'll be moving next week. Excited about that. I'll eventually get back to a point where I'm cranking out videos like I used to, and analysis and opinions. I'm trying to just film a couple just like fun videos for the next month or so that don't take much editing, just to keep things active, hopefully share some fun, interesting insights. So be on the lookout for that. Until next time, enjoy UFC 303. And I will see you perhaps next week. I'll see you next time. How about that? Have a good weekend, guys.